Welcome to Night Drive Paranormal, the show where we gather together and I get to share some of the terrifying paranormal stories that you have all been sending me. Remember, whatever you choose to believe, the people who submitted these stories all claim that their experiences really happened. So get comfortable and let's take another late night drive together. Let's get into our first case tonight. You can call me T, everyone else does. I work as a night manager for a large supermarket chain not far from the supposed paranormal hotspot of Cannock Chase in the UK. I've never considered myself a believer in the paranormal. Not that I didn't want to believe, just that until this point I've never experienced anything to convince me that there was something beyond what is considered normal. This all happened on an otherwise normal night shift, just a couple of months ago. It was just after midnight closing, and my security guard, let's call him Will, was doing his final checks before locking everything down for the night. There's often a few stragglers or drunks hiding in the toilets, hoping to sleep off a night of drinking. So he has to be pretty thorough and sweep the whole building before the shutters come down. Around 12:15 he called me over the radio to tell me he swept the shop floor, restaurants and toilets, and that they were all clear. But upon checking the cameras for areas customers had no access to, he had seen movement in the warehouse up on the mezzanine level, where clothing and electricals are stored. Now it's worth mentioning that that area is secure. Only my own and Will's access cards would allow us up there at night, and no other staff would have any reason to venture up there during the night shift. Will said it looked as if someone had run their hand along a rail of men's jackets and left them swinging. He guessed that it was perhaps a gust of wind from the AC, or even a bird trapped inside the warehouse. We occasionally get a few that sneak in through the outer doors, but he thought he saw a shadow too, and that was worth checking in person. So while Will went to lock the main doors and drop the shutters, I volunteered to check out the movement on the mezzanine level, all the while in constant contact with Will via the store radio. The upper part of the warehouse has always been a bit dark and creepy, due to its out-of-the-way nature, relatively poor lighting, and the fact that nobody ever ventures up there at night. As I approached the area I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Over the radio I asked if he could double-check the camera, to see if anyone had come running out of there or hidden somewhere else, on hearing me climb the narrow metal steps up to the second floor. As Will was in the office rewinding the footage, I continued to move the clothes rails back and forth and generally investigate the area, still finding nothing. At one point even resorting to the flashlight on my phone for a bit of extra illumination, as the lights upstairs are dimmed through the night. Will came back over the radio, but this time with a strange urgency to his voice. In a slightly hushed tone he said, "Mate, the rail you just moved, the one with the coats, I can see clear as day now. He's just standing right there, looks young, wearing a dark hoodie, just looking right at you. You just shone your phone right at him." Well, I can't see a damn thing, so I'm straight back on the radio. Agitation probably quite evident in my voice. "Will, is this a fucking wind-up? There's nothing here. We don't have time for this." At this point I'm expecting laughter or an admission of, "Okay mate, you got me." But Will came back straight away. "No, he's still there. I'm looking right at him. You just walked less than an arm's length from the guy." I'm not sure what to think. If it's a joke, he's taking it a bit too far. So I say, "Okay, I'm coming down. Keep monitoring the camera so you don't lose him. And I swear there better be something to see when I get there." As I get to the office, Will has the footage paused on an image. It's myself just a few minutes ago. Arm outstretched, pushing back a rail of men's coats. And no kidding, clear as day. There's a young lad stood right there, just looking at me. As Will hits play I can be seen searching around, moving a few boxes and other rails of clothing. And this character, this young lad, just stood right there for the whole thing. Now, he wasn't transparent, floating or rattling chains. Just a guy. Stood right next to the coats, not moving an inch. And at one point, as Will said, I had shone my phone torch right at him. Will switched back to the live feed, which had been on one of the smaller screens. The guy was still there. So I say, "Okay mate, this is what I want you to do. I'll stay here and monitor the cameras to make sure he doesn't run. Grab a colleague off the shop floor and head up there. Don't go alone." So right now I'm working on the assumption that this is just a homeless fella looking for a place to crash, or a customer messing about, and I'm a blind idiot for not seeing him when I was up there. I'd split the camera feeds between the live view of our trespasser and tracking Will plus another colleague, Chris, moving through the store towards the warehouse. As they approached the secure gate at the top of the stairs, my eyes were flickering between the two screens, them and the intruder. Now, I swear I only looked away for an instant, but just as my guys opened the gate, a mere 20 feet from where the lad had been standing, I looked back to the mezzanine camera, and he simply wasn't there anymore. Still on the radio to Will, I asked if anyone had seen him pass on the stairs, or if he heard any movement. There's only two ways off that floor, either down the narrow metal stairs that Will and Chris had just climbed, or through an alarmed fire exit. He hadn't seen or heard anything, and on further investigation he could find nobody up there. With Will on his way back down, I started rewinding the footage to see where this individual could possibly have hidden in that split second. I was somewhat baffled to not be able to find the figure, even rewinding right back to myself being up there. They just weren't there at all. When Will got back to the office, he did the same thing. Neither of us knew what to make of it, as we had both seen him, clear as anything. We just kind of wrote it off as a side effect of fatigue, or a trick of the light. While the figure wasn't visible no matter how far back the footage was rewound, the rail of coats could still be seen to move, as if someone had run their hand along the rail and left them swinging. Honestly, I'm still not sure if this was something truly paranormal, or we were both tired and just imagined things. Our store wasn't built on an ancient Indian burial ground or anything. It's just your average modern day supermarket building. But there have always been stories about weird stuff happening. Kids' bare footprints in the car park in the early hours of the morning, or mysterious shadow figures caught only out at the corner of your eye. I never really put much stock into these stories, but now I truly don't know. I'm certainly a bit more wary of going upstairs on my own in the dead of night. If you want me to share your experiences on a forthcoming episode of Night Drive Paranormal, then please feel free to drop me an email at thetapelibrary@protonmail.com. I try wherever possible to read your stories as they are written, so please do provide as much detail as you can. Let's get into our next case. All of my experiences and those of others happened over a long stretch of time. These incidents weren't daily, but something that would occur at least once a week, with something big happening maybe every 2 or 3 years. When I was small, we moved into what became my childhood home. I was at that age where you start to form lasting memories, but still too young to remember every detail. I do remember the first day we moved in. I was upset. We were finally moving into a house after living in a flat, but this house didn't have a chimney like the others on the street. I remember being very confused because there was still a fireplace, yet no chimney. I was carried into each room. There were 3 bedrooms, my parents' room at the front of the house, my room which was just across from theirs, and the nursery, which connected directly to the largest room in the house, the dining room. We didn't use the dining room much in the beginning. The floors were heavily damaged and needed repairs. To be honest, the whole house was in rough shape. The back garden was completely overgrown, and everything inside felt very outdated, even for the early 2000s. The house was always cold. I'm not sure how old it was, but I guess it was built in the late 40s or 50s. And here's where things started to get strange. The people we bought the house from had recently suffered a death in the family. They had 2 children. The youngest had passed away. I didn't know this until many years later. At the time, I only knew of the eldest child. Everything had been cleared out of the house except the nursery. The toddler's toys were still in the corner. A small bed and a few other objects had been left untouched. In the years that followed, we did extensive renovations. The shed at the back of the garden was torn down. The overgrown plants were cleared and replaced. Honestly, I don't remember much of that, only what I saw later on old VHS tapes. A few years later, my brother was born. I remember asking my parents for a little brother, even picking out his name myself. After he was born, that's when things started to change in the house. One morning, probably around 6 or 7 o'clock on a weekend, I was sitting on my parents' bed. My brother was asleep in his cot in their room and we were just chatting, taking it slow since we didn't have to be anywhere. I remember looking through the doorway and into my room, which almost directly lined up with my parents' door. I was staring at the top of the door frame and remembering how we had never replaced one of the panes of glass above it. It was still broken, just like it had been the day we moved in. Then, something caught the corner of my eye. From where I was sitting, I could see into the dining room. And under the table, I saw a small boy. A toddler. Maybe 3 or 4 years old. He was wearing slightly outdated clothes, like something from the 90s, even though it was 2004. I remember feeling confused, a bit cold, but not scared. I turned to my parents and told them what I was seeing. They looked confused. And when I turned back to point him out, the boy was gone. They told me I was just imagining things, probably imagining what my brother might look like when he was older. But I never believed that. It wasn't like imagining something as a kid, he was clear as day. The morning light illuminated part of the house and I stared at him for at least 6 seconds. I remember every detail. His short hair, his innocent stare, the blue and red striped t-shirt and blue shorts. A few years passed and my brother and I became inseparable. He moved into my room and we spent most of our time outdoors. We only really came inside to play with Legos. Eventually my brother and I outgrew that room and I started experiencing frequent nightmares. I'd wake up in the night hearing things entering the room, moving under the bed. At that time we didn't have any pets, so I was very unsettled. My blanket would even be pulled off the bed in the night and dragged onto the floor. Because of all this, I was moved permanently into the nursery, which had become my dad's office. For a while everything felt normal. Until one night when I was in the 3rd grade. It had been years since I saw the boy in the dining room. The dining room which now sat right outside my bedroom door. That night I was woken up by a sound. I sat up in bed. My door was closed, which was unusual. Then I heard a child calling my name. It wasn't my brother's voice. It sounded very different and had this odd echo to it. The voice called my name again. Then, "Where are you?" It repeated itself 3 times, with this almost curious tone. The air felt cold, and the room felt like it was swaying, like a tree in the wind every time the voice spoke. I mustered the courage to shout back, "I'm here, what do you want?" I'm not sure why I said that, it just came out. My voice was angry and sharp. The moment I said it, everything went dead silent. So silent I could hear my heartbeat, my breathing, even that strange ringing you only hear when a room is truly still. Then my dad burst into the room. I told him what had happened, and this time he didn't tell me I was dreaming. He seemed concerned. He told me a story about a man who was called by God. I said, but this was a child's voice. That seemed to unsettle him. I think he remembered then that this used to be his study. He stayed with me until I fell asleep. For the next few nights I was terrified of going to bed, but eventually the fear faded. About a week later we had a barbecue and my nana and granddad were visiting. I said goodnight and went to bed. Not long after they left I woke up again. My parents were still up in the living room. The reason I woke up was strange. There was an indentation on my bed, like someone was sitting on it. I remember sensing it before I even opened my eyes, thinking maybe one of my grandparents had come in to say goodnight, but no one was there. The room wasn't dark, the dining room light was on, and the door was open. I just stared at the dent in my bed, completely frozen with fear. It felt like I had left my body. Then it rose. The moment it did, I bolted out of the room, sprinting towards my parents' voices, screaming about what had just happened. My mum didn't believe me, but my dad looked even more shaken than last time. I begged not to be sent back to that room. Reluctantly, after some convincing from my dad, my mum let me sleep in their bed. Things only got weirder from there. Objects would disappear and reappear in strange places. The house would suddenly turn cold even in the middle of summer. But for a long time nothing major happened again, until I was older. And then it all started again. I began seeing shadowy figures in the corners of my vision. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and everything would go blurry for a second, before clearing again. I even saw doctors about it, but they couldn't find anything wrong with my eyes, or me in general. At this point my parents were going through a divorce. My dad would often be left alone in the house. When I started mentioning these strange things again, it seemed to jog his memory. He admitted that he, too, had been experiencing things. Small feet running around the house when he was home alone, items falling off counters, even when no windows or doors were open. Most of it happened in the dining room, right near my old room. I told him about the voices in the cold spots. That's when he finally told me. The previous owner had lost their youngest child. That's why they sold the house. That's why it was in such disrepair when we moved in. It all started to make sense. I felt overwhelmed with guilt, remembering how harshly I had shouted at that voice, when it had called my name so innocently. The disturbances continued over the years. Besides one time when my leg was yanked in the bed, nothing felt malicious. It was more curious than anything else. I wish I could say the story has a definitive ending, but it doesn't. I left home 3 years ago. I've only been back twice, but even then I felt the cold spots, heard the soft footsteps from the dining room. I almost feel sorry for it, the little boy. He doesn't seem to interact with anyone anymore. But every now and then something will move out of place, or you'll hear those faint steps across the floor. Maybe there is a logical explanation. Maybe it's just an old house and me and my dad, having grown up there, were shaped by movies or fears. But the strange thing is, my mum was very religious. We never watched scary films, never talked about ghosts or demons. We knew nothing about that world, and still we experienced things that fit the definition of poltergeist activity. Cold spots, objects moving, voices. Maybe one day when I visit again, I'll try to make contact. Or maybe it's best just to let the little guy wander around the house in peace, playing with what he finds and leaving things in strange places. Let's get into our third story now, and we are headed to Kansas City. I work as a security guard, and the first 2 posts I had were incredibly haunted. I thought about sending the story in for a while, but after hearing a previous episode which featured a story from a security guard in Wales, I figured I might as well share it. To start off with, I worked the evening shift at the time these occurrences happened, from 3 to 11 PM. I've always been interested in the paranormal, more so the folklore behind the stories, as I'm a big history nerd. As for the reported hauntings and the stories themselves, I've always been more of a skeptic, believing that most things can be explained away through rational means. But it's that small percentage of occurrences that can't be explained that really interests me, and I cannot for the life of me explain these. The first post was a large skyscraper in the financial district of Kansas City, Missouri. It is currently being used as both retail and residential, so I will not be using its name. It was built in 1964 and used to be the headquarters of a local bank. It was a big deal and was, at the time, the tallest building in Kansas City. The last grinder used in the construction was signed by a lot of local prominent men, including former US President Harry S. Truman. It ended up being 30 occupiable floors, with a lower level with some shopping, 2 sub-levels that operated as both mechanical and storage. The 30th floor originally housed a restaurant with 2 upper mechanical floors. The building housed the banking offices and vaults, with the rest being rented out to businesses and law offices. By the time I was stationed there in 2013, only maybe a quarter of the building was still in use. The bank had built a new skyscraper a block away in 1986, and the big concrete and steel beast was starting to show its age. The patrol routes of my co-workers and I consisted of walking roughly 1/3 of the building floors every hour. Most of the floors were pretty chill, but there were some floors that the atmosphere was just off. Nothing that you could put your finger on, but for a lack of a better term, you felt like you weren't welcome. The upper mechanical room at the top of the building was one of these. In addition to being full of shadows and generally creepy, even when the lights were on, there was something else there that always had me hurrying to complete my patrol of that floor before I could bolt to the safety of the stairwell. It was here that I had my first paranormal experience. When you got off the elevator, you had to unlock this set of steel industrial double doors in order to go in. On this particular evening I did so as usual, but as I turned to turn on the light in the room, what I can only describe as a small white orb appeared just above my left hand. My first thought was that it was a moth, but you shouldn't be able to see it in the dark like this. As I was thinking this, it travelled up the length of my arm, never touching it but following the contours of it up to my shoulder. When it reached my shoulder, it went over it and behind me. I had been tracking it with my eyes, and as I turned to continue watching it, it had just disappeared. I was in disbelief. Surely that hadn't just happened, had it? Suffice to say, I went ahead and left the lights on in the space that evening, turning them off on my second patrol through the space after I had finished in that area. I continued to do that same routine every subsequent patrol until I left that post. It was the only time I saw anything in that space, but every so often the atmosphere there would be different, and I would make sure I got in and out as quick as I could. The only other visual experience I had was on the 6th floor. It was late afternoon in the summer, and I was on my first patrol through the building, so it was still pretty light out. This floor used to be the old bank offices, and so there were a lot of old cubicles set up. This floor didn't have any bad vibes, so I wasn't too concerned as I was walking my round. But as I turned right to go down a long row of cubicles, I stopped suddenly. At the very end of the pathway between the cubicle rows, a large white mist moved from left to right before disappearing. I was shocked because it couldn't have been anything outside. It's the 6th floor, so there's no reflections from passing cars, and they wouldn't have looked like a mist anyway. I didn't feel anything adverse like on some of the other floors though. It was almost like whatever it was just passing through. As such, I just shook my head and continued my patrol, After all, it wasn't the weirdest thing I'd seen at that place. Going back to what I had said about some floors just having a negative atmosphere, the 10th floor was the worst. It had been occupied by an advertising firm that folded back in the late 90s, and it had been sitting there unoccupied ever since. None of us guards liked that floor. When you stopped at that floor, you immediately felt like you were being watched. Moreover, the feeling was a little more hostile than on other floors. Whatever was there did not want anyone else in there. The strangest thing is that with everything else that I had encountered at that building, I never saw or heard anything on the 10th floor. Perhaps that's because I tried not to spend much time there. But you'd think with that negative energy on that floor, that it would be where most of the activity would take place. That was not the case, at least not for me. As far as any stories that may shed light on these hauntings, I can't really say. The only death of note in the building was of a lawyer who died of a heart attack in his office in the 90s, but that was it. The previous building on the site was an old turn-of-the-century hotel that was demolished to make way for the skyscraper, but I don't know anything beyond that. The land itself is in the oldest part of town, back when it was first settled in the 1830s and 40s. So many buildings have been built, demolished and built again in downtown Kansas City that it's impossible to say how or why whatever was there came to be there in the first place. The skyscraper was the first place I had seen anything paranormal, but another post I worked part-time at is where I first heard things that were paranormal. This was at an elementary school that was built in East Kansas City. Again, it is still in use as a charter school, so I will not name it, but it's in an older and rougher part of the town. The main building was built in 1914 when Kansas City was expanding out to the east. As such, the school is very old and still has a very Victorian-inspired design, which is interesting. Complete with transom windows on the classrooms, wood floors in the classrooms, and small nooks and crannies that must have been used for one thing or another. I was posted there several times to fill in for other guards that were taking vacations, or were out sick. The few times I was there was more than enough for me, however. The first time I was there, I was in the main office on the first floor, just at the top of the entryway stairs. Now the entryway has a split staircase, with one set going up to the first floor and another set on either side going down to the cafeteria and gym. This was copied on the stairs going to the second floor. This is important to note because at around 6 PM, long after any teachers had gone home, I heard movement on the second floor, almost like a shuffling of feet. Then, I heard a door close. I put down my book and walked up to the second floor where I had been hearing the sounds. Being as that this was a rough part of town, I wasn't too sure that a homeless person or an addict had broken into the building. But as I got up there, the sounds had stopped. I checked in all the classrooms and nothing was amiss. All the classroom doors were open as usual. Lights were off. Nothing. Shrugging it off, I went back down the stairs to the main office and sat back down again. After a while, I heard the sounds of walking again. This time, with some faint talking. It was deep and sounded like a male. Sure that somebody was there, I ran back up the stairs. Again, the sound stopped. I called out, "Security, show yourself." In hindsight, it was probably foolish of me to check it out without anybody else there to back me up. But I checked all the classrooms again. Again, nothing. I was rattled by now, so I went back downstairs to the main office and turned on the radio. This was mostly to distract myself from the sounds that this place was making, and it kept up like that the entire night. Every so often a door would shut. A man would mutter. Something would shuffle in the second floor hallway. By the time my relief showed up, I was elated to see him. I asked him point blank, "Is this place haunted?" He didn't really reply to that, probably because he didn't want me to not come back and then have to fill the shift himself. I did come back the next night and the same things happened, but to a lesser degree. The radio became my friend over those days. I still had to do my patrols, but I always did the second floor when it was light out. and never went back up there once it got dark. At the end of my third and final day there, I again asked the relief officer if the school was haunted. "I've been hearing some weird stuff up on the second floor," I told him. He finally admitted that it was. "Oh, yeah. You hear it all the time up there. You get used to it. They don't bother you none." I was dumbfounded by that. When I went back to my regular post at the skyscraper, I talked about my previous experiences. I mentioned the school and what had happened to my supervisor. His eyes got wide. "Oh, so you got to hear them then?" It turns out the school had been one of his former posts before he became a supervisor. He said that the sounds were pretty common in the evenings after the students and teachers had left for the day. He also said that during the 60s, a parent had shot and killed a principal there. Like most of these kinds of stories, I wasn't able to find anything to confirm or deny that this event actually happened. In any case, it was good to know that I had validation, at least for the sounds I heard. I ended up going back there a couple more times to fill in, but now that I was prepared, it wasn't as nerve-wracking anymore. They, or whoever it was, stayed on the second floor, and I stayed in the main office. It was a sort of respect for each other's spaces, I suppose. I never bothered them, and they did likewise for me. I even got to the point where I would do my patrol on the second floor and say, "Hello, just passing through." I've never experienced anything else at the other posts I've been at since these two. I don't know what it was about these two places, be it their age, location, or both, but nowhere I've been since has ever equaled the experiences I've had at these two places. Next up, we have a handful of short experiences from Andy. If you are enjoying these stories, then please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any future editions. Let's get into his story. When I was about 14 years old, I was turning over laundry in my garage. The garage was mostly empty, save for some clutter stacked up on one side. My back was next to the rolling door. I was moving close to the dryer when all of a sudden I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I froze and my body said, "Get the hell out of there." So I ran only a few feet to get inside and slammed the door behind me. As I was running, I heard the distinct sound of claws clicking on the concrete floor. My dog was sleeping on the couch during this encounter, so I cannot explain what made the sound. Not long after this, when I was in high school, I was working on my grandma's front door. My dad asked me to clear off the rust with navel jelly while I was visiting her. One morning during my visit to her house, I did just that. I was kneeling outside of the front door wiping the screen door with the navel jelly, when I heard, "What are you doing?" in my right ear. Clear as it could be. It was not even scary sounding. It sounded like an older woman who was just frail, just asking me what I was doing. My grandma was inside watching TV with the front door closed. I could not even hear her TV show from outside, so this voice was not her. The voice was so clear that I turned around to see if anyone was on the street or behind me, but no one was there. Going back in time, as a child I was always afraid of the dark. It's normal, I suppose, but I feel like I was extra afraid of the dark. When I awoke in the night, I would look in the darkness and see shapes and start to imagine terrible things coming down the hallway to my room. This faded as I got older, but was always in the back of my mind. Something about my room and the hallway just freaked me out. Being stupid kids inspired by TV, my brother and I decided to hold a paranormal investigation in our house at 3 AM one weekend, when my parents went away for a trip. We had 2 digital cameras that we placed around the house. We did not expect anything to happen, but we wanted the rush of seeing if we could conjure up a ghost or something like that. One camera was in my room, the other was in the kitchen. We asked questions like, "Is anyone here?" or "Can you give us a sign?" We did not hear anything. We moved to the garage and asked the same question. Nothing. Last, we went to the hallway that led to the bedrooms and asked the same question. We also said, "If you want to tell us something, talk into the orange light on the camera in the bedroom on the left," which was my bedroom. We waited for some time, then ended the investigation because we did not see anything. It was not until the next day that we found some odd things during our investigation. My brother was looking through the footage on his computer. I watched sitting next to him. When we were listening to the footage from the kitchen, we heard the pitter-patter of footsteps, almost like a little kid running around. We then heard noises of cabinets closing and opening, but nothing happened in the video. When we looked at the garage footage, we recorded what we still believe to this day to be an EVP saying, "Fuck you, fuck you," after we asked questions like, "Who are you?" and "How old are you?" The last thing we found was the most chilling to me. We looked at the footage from my bedroom. For the most part, it was really quiet and uninteresting, until we asked whatever it was in the area to speak into the light on the camera. After we heard my brother's voice saying those words, there was a loud buzzing for 30 seconds on the recording. It was constant, loud, and seemed more than a coincidence. I was frozen with fear. Were my fears as a kid just childish fears? Or was there something more to my unease in that room? My bedroom was always exceptionally cold in the winter, and I also did hear voices coming from my window once when I was really little. Needless to say, I was afraid to sleep for a while. Hope you're still with me out there. Let's get into story number 5. A few years back, I lived in a city in the northwest of Virginia. It's an old town with a lot of history, and has several historical buildings still standing. Many locations in the town seemed like places spirits of the departed could comfortably call home. A few ghost tours are offered by local guide groups, and there is even a winery that was once used as a makeshift hospital during the American Civil War. My experience, however, was with a spirit I believe to be much more contemporary than those you may encounter at the usual haunts. I have a deep love for animals, which led me to take a job as a shelter manager at the local SPCA. The SPCA itself was split between 2 separate buildings, a newer adoption centre, where potential pet owners could have meet and greets with the available animals, and the much older intake building. It was here that surrendered pets or strays would be brought in, quarantined if necessary for an appropriate amount of time, vaccinated, socialised, and eventually moved next door when ready for adoption. I believe the intake building was built in the 1960s or the 1970s, and its age was very much felt. The area is no stranger to occasional flooding and snowstorms, which had slowly eaten away at the building over the last 50 to 60 years. My director had plans to renovate the building, perhaps even demo it entirely and build a more inviting and less dour facility. There were many more plans that took priority, and to my knowledge the old building remains as gloomy and cold as ever. I had been working there for a few months without incident. There was no indication of anything strange other than the building being unwelcoming. The layout of the intake building was slightly labyrinthian, but the front entrance was straightforward. My co-worker and I shared a desk and a workstation to the left of the entrance, with an office behind that desk. It was here that previous managers would work, and secretaries would run the desk. My director changed the staffing, so there were 2 managers, one for cat intakes, my position, and one for dog intakes, and we handled our own paperwork. I mention this to indicate that neither myself nor my co-worker spent any time in the back office. It was only used to store supplies for our foster program, and housed old records and files. One morning I arrived to work, tired from insufficient sleep the night before. Behind my workstation was a mini fridge with an empty glass candy bowl we had moved off the front desk area to get rid of some clutter. This mini fridge was located directly outside the back office door, which we left open to more easily grab supplies if a foster stopped in. My co-worker was already getting set up for the day, and we grumbled greetings to each other. I walked past the mini fridge without touching it, and set my bag down at my desk. Seconds later, my co-worker and I nearly jumped out of our skins as a loud and unexpected crash broke through the silence of the morning. The candy bowl seemed to just leap off the fridge unprovoked. I assumed that in my tiredness I simply didn't remember bumping into the fridge, but my co-worker had seen me come in and noticed the jar had fallen several seconds after I had walked by. I had been standing still by the time it fell. I had not bumped into anything. Annoyed that I was just standing there while there was glass on the ground, my co-worker barked, "Don't just stand there, go get the broom." I snapped out of my shock and turned to head to the supply closet just down the hall. Right after she spoke, the Amazon Alexa on her desk chimed, "I'm sorry, I don't see the black-eyed woman." Our eyes grew wide, and we stared at each other for a moment before looking to the Alexa, then to the open office behind us. We both felt this eerie sense of dread as we gazed in and saw nothing. Shaken by this, but needing to get started with the day, we both noted how absolutely bizarre it was for the Alexa to say something so strange, and completely unrelated to my co-worker's command. We normally took our lunch at the desk, but when lunchtime came we were still pretty freaked out, and headed to the adoption centre to share our experience with our other co-workers. Most of our co-workers were indeed disturbed, but didn't seem to ruminate on how odd it was for long. When we recounted the event to our director though, she immediately tensed up. "Did I ever tell you about the manager who killed herself in that office?" she asked us. My co-worker and I were taken aback. "No," we both gasped in unison. "Well, we used to carry medications in-house, rather than having a vet come out with their own suppliers like they do now. We even carried euthanasia drugs." She paused, letting this new information sink in. A former manager in the intake building euthanized herself in the 90s, which is why we no longer carry any meds that haven't been prescribed from a vet's office. I wonder if that might be what the Alexa was referring to by the black-eyed woman. We were perturbed by this, and were on edge for a week or two afterwards. Luckily, no further activity from the back office or strange messages came from the Alexa again. I attempted to find evidence of the strange suicide occurring in local newspapers from the time, but couldn't find anything definitive. There's the potential that family requested her death be kept quiet for privacy reasons. I have no reason to doubt my director's sincerity, especially if that incident is the reason entire policies about drug storage had to be changed for our facility. This was definitely the creepiest thing I've experienced regarding the paranormal, and I hope that none of my future places of employment are home to any lingering spirits. We're going to wrap up tonight with one last short encounter. Don't forget, if you've enjoyed these stories, click the like button if you're watching on YouTube, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. This was a real paranormal encounter that my friend experienced, and it's always given me the willies every time he's told it to me. It's definitely a creepy story in general, but what sets it apart is it may have a connection to a real girl who had died just a few 100 feet from my friend's house shortly before this encounter happened. I'll talk more about this girl later on. I decided I should tell this story from my friend's first person point of view. It will help the story flow more coherently and feel more unnerving when told from his perspective. So here it goes. When I was 13 years old, I lived in a house with my parents and my older sister. One weekday morning I woke up and saw a girl standing in my doorway looking at me. Since I had just woken up, my eyes were blurry and fuzzy, so I couldn't make out the face, but I could tell it was a girl, and I immediately thought it was my sister. I got annoyed and said, "Go away, I'm trying to sleep." I then rolled over on my bed. A few minutes later I turned my head around and saw my sister still standing there. I got angry again and said, "Why are you in my room? Get the hell out of here, Candice." She didn't move, and I yelled once more. She then turned around and walked out of my room. I leapt out of bed angry because I hate being ignored. I went out to the hallway and saw my sister at the bottom of the stairs. She was turning right and going into the kitchen. I called out to her, no response. I ran down the stairs into the kitchen, but she wasn't there. I walked through the kitchen to the short hallway, leading to the garage, and opened the door. Nobody was in there, and the cars were gone, which meant both my parents had already left for work. I closed the door and then I heard footsteps behind me in the kitchen, going down into the basement. At this point I was still angry and thought it was my sister being annoying and trying to scare me. I ran down the stairs and came into the basement family room. It was empty. I went into the laundry room, which also was empty. Then I heard footsteps behind me once more. I turned around and saw a quick glimpse of my sister going into her bedroom. I followed her in there. When I came into the bedroom, I didn't see my sister, but instead there was another girl, standing in my sister's open closet. She was a few years older than me, brown shoulder-length hair, and was wearing a blue dress. It looked like a dress someone would wear to prom. She didn't say anything and just stood there, staring at me. I ran out of there as fast as I could and went to my bedroom, got dressed and bolted out the front door and ran to school. Earlier before the story, I mentioned a girl who had died. My friend lived right across the street from the high school football field. The back of the bleachers faced the side of his house just a few 100 feet away. A few months before my friend encountered the strange girl wearing a dress in his house, a girl had committed suicide right outside. She hung herself off the backside of the bleachers on the football field. According to some rumours, she was wearing her prom dress when she hung herself. He believes that's who he saw. The midnight hour is coming to an end, my friends, and I'm afraid I have to leave you for the rest of your journey alone. If you want to share your thoughts about tonight's cases, feel free to drop me a comment below. I really do enjoy reading every response. I will be back very soon with another entry into the tape library, and then after that we'll be back here for another drive together. Before we go, it's just time to thank the wonderful supporters who keep the tape library and Night Drive Paranormal going. Our tape library archivist Umiko Grimm, West Virginia Vegetable Man, Wen Senior, Tina S, The Crimson DM, The Detective, Sirius Wax, Stephen Lutman, Sean Miller, Sandy Lusk, Sag El Caddy, Restock 1731, Quirky Joseph, Pixelina, Peter McCann, Monty Montes, Mirashard, Midia Zabine, M.E. Bartley, Lady Bet Noir, Juno, Judith Hacker, Joseph Condola, Jolly Jedi, Joe, G-Raw, Gabrielle, Eric Salas, Dagon O'Dorleg, Dominic DeAngelis, Destiny M, Dawn, Swan, Darla, Crystal Edwards, Ash Loves Books, Alfredo Sandoval and Adeline. Our lead archivist, Xavier Angle, Vaniel, Tyler Michael, Tracy Torello, The Original Deer, Ridiculous, Old Soul Like Mine, Plague Doctor Is In, Melissa Harrison, Law William, London Grace, Creepy Candy, Brian Baker, Amy Stubblefield, Alex O'Neill, Alex Goldberg, and 1000th Ghost. And our very generous Grand Overseers, the God Emperor of Mankind, Morning Rain 2619, Leah Carmela, Katie, Harrison the Yoga Lord, Bad Diddle, Agent 355, and I'm sure some of you will be excited by this, the returning Queen of Flatulence. See you all soon. Get home safe.